Part 1. The Man Who Became a Ghost. In late November 1939, the forests of Finland fell silent. The sun barely rose above the horizon. The temperature dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, and the snow, deep, endless, blindingly white, swallowed the world whole. It was here, in this frozen wilderness of Karelia, that one of the strangest and most one-sided wars in modern history began. It would last only 100 days, but in that short time, a small rural nation of 4 million Finns would humiliate the largest army on earth, Joseph Stalin's Red Army. And from that blizzard of bullets, one man would emerge as a living legend. His name was Simo Häyhä. At first glance, he didn't look like the kind of man who could stop an army. He was only 5'3", stocky, quiet, and almost shy. A farmer and hunter from the village of Rautjärvi near the Soviet border. Before the war, his life had been simple: tending crops, feeding his dog, competing in local shooting contests. He wasn't rich or famous or even particularly ambitious, but he had one talent, an almost supernatural ability to shoot. In the countryside of eastern Finland, hunting was survival. Every shot counted. You didn't waste bullets, and you didn't miss. That discipline, born in the forests, would soon turn him into the most efficient killer the modern battlefield had ever seen. When Stalin's forces invaded Finland on November 30th, 1939, they expected a walkover. The Soviet Union had 20 times Finland's population, thousands of tanks, and a modern air force. Finland had mostly reservists, antique rifles, and ski patrols. But what the Soviets didn't count on was something far more dangerous than numbers: sisu. There's no perfect translation of sisu. It means grit, determination, endurance, the refusal to give up even when logic says you should. It's the Finnish national soul, and in that winter, it became a weapon. Simo Häyhä joined the Finnish Army's 6th Company of GR34 as a humble corporal. No fancy training, no sniper school, just a bolt-action rifle, the Finnish-made M2830, based on the old Mosin the Gaunt. No telescopic sight, no fancy optics, just iron sights. That last part wasn't an accident. Soviet snipers, flush with new equipment, used scopes that glinted in the sunlight, betraying their position. Simo knew this. He also knew that in temperatures cold enough to freeze a man's eyelids shut, glass scopes often fogged or cracked. So he chose simplicity: iron sights, which never failed, never reflected light, and allowed him to keep his head lower to the ground. That one choice, born of pure practicality, made him nearly invisible. In early December, near the Kola River, the first rumors began. Soviet troops started whispering about a Finnish ghost, a sniper who could kill a man before you heard the shot. They said he could see through the snow, that he never missed, that he was everywhere and nowhere. At first, Soviet officers laughed it off, superstitious nonsense. But then, patrols stopped coming back, scouts vanished, platoons froze in their foxholes, terrified to lift their heads. The landscape itself seemed alive, watching. The truth was simple but terrifying. Simo Häyhä had turned 20 square kilometers of forest into his personal hunting ground, and the Red Army into prey. He worked alone. No spotter, no radio, no backup. Just a rifle, a few dozen rounds, and an old Suomi submachine gun slung across his chest for emergencies. Each morning before dawn, he would ski out into the white wasteland, find a patch of snow with a clear line of sight, and begin the patient ritual of vanishing. He would pack the snow in front of him to muffle the recoil blast. He would sprinkle snow on his camouflage so it matched the frost perfectly. And then, most ingeniously, he would put snow in his mouth so that his breath wouldn't form a visible cloud in the freezing air. That tiny trick saved his life countless times. He didn't take chances. Every shot was deliberate, every movement slow, almost mechanical. Soviet soldiers never saw him, only the aftermath. A comrade dropping without sound, a puff of snow where a bullet had struck. Silence. Then fear. As the weeks passed, the Red Army began to break down under the psychological strain. Commanders received reports that entire platoons were refusing to advance through certain areas. "The White Death is there," they said. They weren't exaggerating. In just under 100 days, Simo Hayek killed 505 confirmed soldiers, and probably many more unconfirmed. That's an average of 5 kills per day, in weather that could kill a man before the enemy's bullet did. To put that in perspective, the most successful Allied sniper of World War II, the British marksman Billy Singh, had 200 confirmed kills, over years of combat. Simo did more than double that in a single winter. And he did it with a bolt-action rifle. When asked after the war how he did it, Simo reportedly said, "Practice." But that's the Finnish way, understatement carved from ice. The truth is, his performance was almost inhuman. Soviet generals were so desperate to stop him that they sent in counter-sniper teams, entire platoons trained specifically to hunt one man. It didn't help. Every time they tried, Simo got them first. One Soviet sniper, identified by his distinctive rifle and officer's insignia, was tracked for 3 days. Simo waited motionless, his rifle buried in snow, until the man finally exposed himself. 1 shot, 1 kill. He retrieved the officer's rifle, examined it briefly, and left it behind. He didn't need it. His old iron-sighted rifle was still perfect. There's a dark humor to the whole story, a kind of grim absurdity. Stalin had sent tanks, artillery, and hundreds of thousands of men into Finland. And in one forest, a single farmer with a rifle was causing more chaos than a division. The Finnish soldiers started calling him Taivaan kuolema, the death from heaven. The Soviets gave him another name, Belia Smert, the White Death. He didn't like the name. He wasn't out for fame. To him, it was just another hunt, one he hadn't asked for but had to finish. Each kill was a necessity, not a victory. He never celebrated. He'd record his day in a small notebook, listing how many targets he'd neutralized, clean his rifle, eat a frozen biscuit, and fall asleep in a hole dug into the snow. One Finnish officer who met him at the front later said, "He looked like an ordinary farmer. You wouldn't notice him in a crowd, but when you looked into his eyes, they were like ice, calm, clear, and impossible to read." The Soviets, humiliated and terrified, escalated their efforts. When counter-snipers failed, they tried artillery. They shelled entire sections of forest where they thought Simo might be hiding, sometimes for hours. But he was always gone by the time the shells landed. Still, his luck could not last forever. In early March 1940, near the end of the war, a Soviet unit finally got close. A firefight broke out, and one of the Red Army's snipers fired an explosive bullet, striking Simo in the jaw. The round shattered his face and blew off part of his cheek. His comrades found him unconscious, barely recognizable, and carried him back to safety. He remained in a coma for a week and woke up on March 13, 1940, the very day the Winter War ended. Finland had lost territory but kept its independence. Stalin's forces had taken 126,000 casualties. One man had contributed over 500 of those. Simo Häyhä never fought again. His face was rebuilt through years of surgery, though it never looked quite the same. But he didn't complain. He returned to his farm, raised dogs, hunted elk, and lived the quiet life he'd always wanted. He never sought glory, he never gave speeches. When asked if he regretted anything, he reportedly said, "I only did what I was told, as well as I could." He lived to be 96 years old, dying peacefully in 2002, the same way he lived, silently, surrounded by snow. But his legacy, that was another story entirely, because Simo Häyhä didn't just kill 505 men. He redefined warfare. He proved that psychology, fear, uncertainty, the unseen, could be as deadly as any bomb. His methods changed sniper doctrine forever. The White Death had become something more than a man. He became a symbol of what one human, armed only with skill, patience, and will, can do when everything else collapses. And somewhere, deep in the forests of Karelia, they still say that if you stand very still on a frozen morning, you can hear it. Not a gunshot, but the wind whispering through the trees. Sisu. Honestor, Part 2, The Birth of the White Death. By December 1939, the forests of Karelia had turned into a frozen hell. The Winter War was only a few weeks old, but the Red Army was already bleeding. Soviet propaganda had promised a quick victory over the tiny Finnish peasant army. Instead, they found themselves swallowed by endless pine forests, knee-deep snow, and enemies they could never see. And somewhere in those trees, quiet as the wind, invisible as smoke, was Simo Häyhä. He was not a soldier by trade, he was a farmer, a man of soil and silence. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and barely spoke above a whisper. Before the war, he spent his days tending fields in Rautjärvi near the Soviet border, and his evenings hunting grouse with his old Mosin Nagant M28 rifle, the Finnish variant of a Russian gun, ironically. When the Red Army invaded, he didn't hesitate. He packed his rifle, pulled on his white snow camouflage, and walked into the forest to fight. The temperature hovered between -20 and -40 degrees Celsius. Metal froze to skin. Machine guns jammed. Soldiers froze to death standing up. But Simo thrived in it. It was his home. The deep woods, the snow that muffled sound, the cold that punished weakness. At first, he fought as part of a small ski patrol unit. But very quickly his commanders noticed something strange. Everywhere Simo went, Soviet soldiers stopped moving. His squad mates would report hearing single rifle cracks, always one shot, and then silence. When they reached the site, they'd find bodies neatly dropped in the snow, each with a bullet through the head or heart. The Soviets began calling him Belaya Smert, the White Death. The name spread through the trenches like a ghost story. But Simo wasn't a ghost. He was something worse, a man who knew how to disappear. His uniform was all white. His rifle was wrapped in white cloth. He dug small snow holes, just big enough to lie in, and packed the snow in front of his muzzle so the blast wouldn't kick up dust. He didn't use a scope. He preferred iron sights because glass reflects sunlight, and reflections get you killed. Soviet snipers would sometimes spot a flash of light in the distance, a glint, and aim for it, only to find nothing. Simo had already moved. His tricks were simple but deadly. He'd pack snow in his mouth to stop his breath from fogging. He'd wait hours, motionless, in temperatures that would freeze a man's eyelids shut. His rifle was zeroed perfectly, his aim honed by years of hunting small birds at long distances. He once said, "I only did what I was told, as well as I could." That understatement hides a terrifying truth. Between December 1939 and March 1940, Simo Häyhä killed more than 500 Soviet soldiers, often alone, sometimes with nothing but his rifle in the snow. The Red Army didn't understand how one man could do this. They sent platoons to hunt him, 30 men at a time. He killed them all. They sent counter-snipers. He killed them too. Eventually, Soviet command began shelling entire patches of forest just to flush him out. But every time, Simo walked away untouched. One Soviet sniper's diary entry found after the war read simply, "We are fighting against the devil of the woods." The Finnish soldiers, meanwhile, saw Simo as both inspiration and mystery. They'd sometimes spot him returning from the forest at dusk, rifle over his shoulder, snow covering his white hood, eyes red from the cold. He'd report his kills quietly, drink a cup of coffee, clean his weapon, and go back out the next morning. No bragging, no fear, just the next target. His secret wasn't superhuman reflexes or technology. It was something the Finns call sisu, a word that doesn't translate perfectly into English. It means a mix of grit, determination, and refusal to break, even when logic says you should. It's not bravery in the moment, it's endurance beyond reason. Simo embodied it. The Soviets learned to fear certain ridges and valleys, marking them on their maps as no-go zones. If you crossed that line, you didn't come back. Commanders began refusing to send troops through those woods unless it was absolutely necessary. In an army of over 1 million men, one farmer had single-handedly paralyzed entire sectors. Even Stalin noticed. Orders came down to eliminate the sniper threat in the Suomussalmi region. The Soviets sent in specialized counter-sniper teams, armed with scoped rifles and silenced pistols. None of them returned. One Soviet survivor, captured later, told Finnish interrogators that it felt like the forest itself was alive, watching us, waiting for us. And then came the bullet that almost ended it all. In early March 1940, the Red Army had begun to adjust its tactics. They were pushing deeper, using artillery more aggressively, and the Finnish lines were stretched thin. Simo was in the forest near the Kola River, crawling through deep snow when a Soviet sniper finally saw him first. The shot exploded. An explosive bullet hit Simo in the lower left jaw, tearing away part of his face. His comrades found him unconscious, bleeding, his face shattered. They thought he was dead. They carried him away and buried the Soviets that had surrounded his position. But Simo didn't die. He woke up a week later, on March 13, 1940, the very day the Winter War ended. Finland had signed peace. He touched his face, bandaged and unrecognizable, and asked one question. Did we win? He couldn't speak properly for years. His face was rebuilt by surgeons in over a dozen operations. But the legend of the White Death had already spread across Europe. Newspapers from Stockholm to New York wrote about the one-man army of Finland. His confirmed kills, 505 with a rifle and over 200 more with a submachine gun, made him the deadliest sniper in recorded history. And yet, when reporters came to find him after the war, they didn't find a hero eager to talk. They found a quiet man tending his farm again, feeding his dogs, cutting wood, and refusing interviews. When asked how he became such a great sniper, he simply said, "Practice." That was Simo. No myth, no bravado. Just a man who went to war, did his job, and went home. But the shadow he cast stretched across generations of soldiers. Part 3. The Psychological War. The forests of Karelia were more than frozen battlefields. They were arenas of terror. And Simo Häyhä didn't just kill men, he broke them before they even raised their rifles. To understand his impact, you have to understand fear. Fear isn't just a feeling. On the battlefield, it's a weapon. A platoon frozen in place loses initiative. An army that hesitates loses ground. And in December 1939, the Red Army discovered that one man, barely taller than a child, could wield fear more effectively than an entire battalion. Simo didn't need to fire a shot to paralyze his enemies. The rumors did that work for him. Soldiers whispered about the White Death in foxholes. Commanders marked certain ridges and forests as no-go zones. Patrols refused orders to advance without artillery support. Entire sectors of the Soviet front were immobilized because one sniper had trained them to expect death from the snow. He became a living psychological weapon. Soviet generals tried to reason it away. It's only one man. It cannot be so effective, they said. But every day that Simo stalked the forests, the psychological weight of his presence grew. Fear compounded fear. And in a winter where frostbite could kill as easily as bullets, hesitation was fatal. He mastered the art of patience. Hours, sometimes days, spent motionless, hiding in snowbanks barely larger than his body. He could hear footsteps, calculate wind direction, judge distance, all without moving a muscle. Snow muffled his sounds, white camouflage hid him from the keenest eyes, and snow in his mouth silenced his breath. Every detail was controlled, every precaution calculated. He had no margin for error. The Soviets sent special anti-sniper squads, 30-man units tasked solely with eliminating him. Each squad moved slowly, communicating in whispers, using the best weapons available. And each squad failed. Simo killed them all. Some of their bodies were found months later in the snow, still in their positions, evidence that the hunter had struck without a trace. Simo's tactics were deceptively simple, but lethal. He avoided exposing himself unnecessarily. He alternated firing positions constantly, even within the same day. He never repeated a pattern. He kept meticulous mental maps of Soviet movements, and when possible, he fired from behind snowbanks, aiming for heads or chest, the most efficient way to neutralize a soldier with one shot. Even when wounded, he didn't surrender. The explosive bullet that shattered his jaw in March 1940 nearly ended him, but he survived. By that point, his psychological effect on the Soviets had become legendary. Entire units reportedly refused to move through areas where the White Death might appear. Some soldiers claimed they could hear him before he even shot. A rustle of snow, a shifting shadow, a breath held too long. Simo's work changed military thinking. Finnish commanders realized they had discovered a force multiplier. One man could paralyze hundreds. The Soviets, embarrassed and furious, began studying his methods. Iron sights, camouflage, extreme patience, environmental advantage. These tactics became a blueprint for future snipers worldwide. Modern military doctrine owes a debt to the quiet Finnish farmer who made fear itself a weapon. Yet for all the horror he inflicted on the enemy, Simo carried no malice. He rarely spoke about his kills. When asked, he would simply shrug and say, "I did what I had to do." His perspective was almost mathematical. There was a war, there were orders, and he executed them. There was no glory, no excitement, only survival and duty. This dispassionate precision made him terrifying. To his enemies, it seemed inhuman, a ghost in the snow, a machine that fired without emotion, appearing and disappearing at will. To his comrades, it was awe-inspiring. They watched a man whose concentration, skill, and endurance seemed limitless. One officer recalled, "We didn't just follow him into battle, we followed him into the impossible." By the time the Winter War ended, Simo Häyhä had etched his name into history. The Soviets had suffered over 500 of their best men killed by his hand alone, their morale shattered by an invisible adversary. Stalin had lost face internationally. His generals had been humiliated, and the doctrine of modern sniping had been rewritten by a man whose only weapons were patience, practice, and relentless will. He became more than a soldier. He became a symbol of asymmetrical warfare, the embodiment of what one determined human could do against overwhelming odds. Where tanks, artillery, and numbers failed, cunning, preparation, and psychological mastery prevailed. The Red Army would never forget the lessons he imposed, and militaries worldwide would study him for decades to come. And yet, despite the fame that would follow, Simo Häyhä returned home quietly. He avoided public life, refusing interviews and accolades. He spent his later years hunting in the same forests where he had made history, tending his farm, and living a life of deliberate simplicity. The ghosts of his enemies did not haunt him publicly. Only the memory of the Winter War itself, embedded in every rustling branch and drifting snowbank, followed him. The White Death had become legend, but it had also become human. A small man from Rautjärvi, who understood the power of patience, the leverage of fear, and the importance of invisible advantage, had paralyzed an army. His legacy was more than kills or records. It was the demonstration that psychology, preparation, and willpower can outperform brute force, and that even a man of ordinary stature can alter the course of history. Part 4. The Hunt for the White Death. Expanded. By the height of winter, Simo Häyhä had become more than a soldier. He was a legend, a ghost in the snow, a force that seemed to bend the battlefield itself to his will. The forests of Karelia, dense with pines and frozen rivers, had become a canvas for his lethal artistry. And for the Red Army, the stories of this invisible killer had evolved from rumor to an undeniable reality. At first, Soviet commanders dismissed them as folklore, the exaggerations of frightened troops. But when entire platoons failed to return, and reconnaissance reports showed men vanishing without a trace, panic began to ripple through the ranks. One man, barely 5'3", armed with nothing more than his Mosin Nagant rifle and a pocket full of bullets, was systematically unraveling the front lines. The Soviet response was swift, methodical, and desperate. Massed infantry assaults, artillery barrages, machine gun suppression. The standard weapons of war were all ineffective against Heha. Soldiers who had faced numerically inferior enemies, or even the harshest winter conditions, found themselves paralyzed by something far less tangible: fear. The Stavka, Stalin's high command, realized that this was no ordinary sniper. They were facing a strategic anomaly, a human weapon whose effect on morale and battlefield dynamics could not be countered by brute force. By late January 1940, specialized anti-sniper units were formed, each tasked exclusively with finding and eliminating the White Death. These units were elite by Soviet standards, 30 men each, carefully selected for their marksmanship, tracking skills, and survival abilities in extreme cold. They carried telescopic rifles, submachine guns, explosives, and the most up-to-date Soviet tactical manuals on sniping. Their orders were simple yet absolute: locate Heha, neutralize him, and erase the symbol he had become. Yet no preparation, no equipment, and no training could account for the unpredictable genius of a man who had spent his life tracking prey in forests that were simultaneously enemy territory and home. The first platoon to engage him moved cautiously along the Kola front. They fanned out, using reconnaissance maps and adhering strictly to Soviet doctrine. Their scopes caught glints of sunlight, inadvertently announcing their positions to a sniper who had learned to detect the subtlest reflections. Heha, lying in a shallow snowbank with his rifle perfectly zeroed, observed their movements. He noted the rhythm of their steps, the pauses, the faint exhalations that even a snow-filled mouth could not completely hide. One by one he fired, clean and silent. Each shot was calculated to strike with maximum efficiency. By the time the platoon realized what was happening, half the men had fallen. The survivors fled in panic, abandoning weapons, supplies, and the cohesion that made them formidable. The next Soviet unit attempted a different approach. They deployed decoys in open fields, hoping to trick him into exposing himself. False movement, dummy rifles, and preset positions were meant to lure him out into the open. Heha, ever observant, recognized the patterns immediately. The artificial movements were too regular, too mechanical, and he ignored them. He waited for human error, for subtle indications of life: a shifted weight, the faint cloud of a breath in the freezing air, a jacket misaligned with the terrain. And when real targets appeared, one by one, he struck. The legend of the White Death now transcended the physical. Soldiers whispered of him in foxholes. He does not sleep. He does not tire. He waits. Stories reached Moscow. Senior officers tried to rationalize the phenomenon, yet even experienced generals struggled to account for the effectiveness of a single man operating alone. One captured Soviet officer recounted tracking footprints through snow, only to find them ending abruptly at a ridge with no sign of where their owner had gone. Others spoke of phantom rifles that seemed to fire from multiple directions, a result of Heha's constant repositioning and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Psychology became as potent a weapon as his rifle. The fear he inspired caused hesitation, slowed advances, and sometimes outright retreats. Entire Soviet divisions found themselves immobilized, unnerved by the possibility of encountering him at any moment. Even the faintest rustle of snow or the glint of ice could spark panic. Heha had weaponized the unknown, and the Red Army, despite its size and resources, could not counteract an enemy it could neither predict nor see. The most dangerous period for Simo came in early March when the Soviets mounted a concerted effort to flush him out. Artillery shells began systematically pounding the forests in attempts to force him into open ground. Reconnaissance patrols, sometimes with dog teams, scoured snowbanks for traces. Soldiers trudged through freezing rivers and thick woods, cautiously checking every mound, every depression. He adapted instantly. He learned to anticipate shell patterns, to reposition while artillery fell around him, and to remain immobile for hours beneath drifts of snow that concealed both his body and rifle. It was during this deadly phase that Simo was struck by an explosive bullet, nearly fatal. Fired by a Soviet marksman, the round shattered his jaw, tore through his cheek, and sent him crashing into the snow. He lay unconscious, nearly frozen, his face coated in blood and frostbite beginning to set on exposed skin. The field surgeons who reached him faced near impossible conditions: sub-zero temperatures, limited supplies, and the urgency of stabilizing a man who had become the symbol of Finnish resistance. Against the odds, Simo survived. His recovery was a testament to medical skill, fortitude, and a lifetime of conditioning in the wilderness. Even as he recuperated, the Soviets did not relent. During these weeks, historians estimate that over 500 men were sent specifically to hunt him. Yet fear had become a weapon in itself. The psychological impact of He's presence, real or imagined, paralyzed units before they even reached his position. Soldiers hesitated, advanced slowly, and often retreated, leaving entire sectors untouched. His name, whispered among men in trenches, had already achieved the ultimate tactical effect: control over the battlefield without firing a single shot. For the Finnish army, the implications were strategic and profound. He's actions allowed smaller units to maintain positions that might have been overrun. His presence amplified their effectiveness, conserved manpower, and delayed Soviet advances. His impact was not measured merely in confirmed kills, though there were 505 by the end of the war, but in the disruption, fear, and psychological dominance he imposed. One man, operating alone, had rewritten conventional understanding of tactics on the front lines. After recovering, Simo did not return to combat. The Winter War ended shortly afterward, with Finland ceding territory but preserving sovereignty, a remarkable achievement against Stalin's forces. He's legacy was cemented not just in statistics, but in the strategic lessons his enemy had unwillingly learned. The mastery of terrain, patience, camouflage, and psychological intimidation could equal or surpass overwhelming numbers. His methods, simple, low-tech, and brutally efficient, became the foundation for modern sniper doctrine. Generations of soldiers worldwide would study them, and every sniper who followed owed a debt to the man who had become a ghost in the snow. Simo He's story reminds us that warfare is not solely about firepower or numbers. It is about mastery of one's environment, control of one's mind, and the ability to impose fear and uncertainty upon the opponent. The Red Army learned that lesson at tremendous cost, and He survived to see the world respect him not as a myth, but as a man whose skills and discipline were extraordinary. His ghostly presence in the forests of Karelia remains a testament to the power of strategy, patience, and the human spirit in war. The White Death's legacy. When the Winter War ended in March 1940, the forests of Karelia were silent, in a way that only the aftermath of extreme violence can create. The snow, once a pristine blanket, now covered hundreds of bodies, trenches, and the shattered remnants of an invasion force. Finland had survived against impossible odds, but the cost was high. The ground was scarred, families grieved, and a generation of young men carried memories of frostbite, artillery, and invisible enemies that would never leave them. Among these men, one figure had become the embodiment of terror and precision: Simo Häyhä, the White Death. For most people, war ends when the guns go quiet and they can return home. For Simo, the war's end marked the beginning of an entirely different battle: the struggle to reconcile the man he had been with the life he wanted to live. The bullet that had shattered his jaw and left him with permanent facial scars could have ended everything. But Simo survived. The surgeons who reconstructed his face worked under primitive conditions, using techniques that would now be considered rudimentary, yet somehow succeeded. When he finally looked into the mirror, he barely recognized the man who stared back, a face marked by violence, but eyes still alert, calm, and unnervingly focused. Simo Häyhä's survival after his injuries became symbolic in itself. The Finnish people, already in awe of his wartime accomplishments, were astounded by the resilience of a man who had faced the full force of Stalin's military and lived. Yet for Simo, fame was irrelevant. Unlike many war heroes, he did not seek accolades, interviews, or recognition. Reporters arrived in Rautjärvi expecting to meet a celebrated sniper who could recount stories of heroism and kills with pride. Instead, they found a quiet, unassuming man tending his farm, chopping wood with methodical precision, and skiing alone across frozen lakes. Fame was an intrusion, something he actively avoided, a distraction from the simplicity he had always valued. The contrast between his wartime lethality and post-war calm is staggering. During the Winter War, Simo had transformed the forests into a lethal chessboard, anticipating every Soviet move, exploiting every advantage of terrain, and using patience as a weapon as powerful as a bullet. Afterward, he spent his days observing the natural rhythms of life, tending animals, and living in close communion with the landscape that had once been a battleground. The same patience and precision that had made him lethal now manifested in quiet, almost meditative routines, feeding his dogs, hunting game for sustenance, maintaining fences, and quietly repairing his home. Yet this outward calm belied the extraordinary psychological weight of his actions. Unlike other war heroes whose feats are public and celebrated, Simo internalized his experiences. His reflections on the men he had killed were sparse, understated, but deeply human. "I only did my duty," he said. "I did what had to be done." That simple statement, when weighed against the enormity of his wartime impact, reveals both humility and a profound understanding of the moral complexity of combat. He had become an instrument of war, a singular, highly effective instrument, but he never confused efficiency with glory. Killing was not a sport, and heroism was not measured in numbers. It was measured in survival and in the protection of the land he loved. Simo's enduring influence extended far beyond Finland. Military strategists worldwide began studying his methods, recognizing in them the principles of modern sniper warfare: minimal exposure, mastery of environmental camouflage, psychological domination, patience, and the precise calculation of every shot. The Finnish army incorporated his tactics into training manuals, while Soviet and other international forces studied him as a case study in asymmetrical warfare. His insistence on iron sights over scopes, once seen as a limitation, became a lesson in how simplicity and adaptation could outperform technology in extreme conditions. Every sniper trained after him learned, often unknowingly, from the White Death's techniques. This duality, the simultaneous embodiment of lethal precision and quiet humanity, is what makes Simo Häyhä's legacy so compelling. On the battlefield, he was unstoppable, a ghost whose very presence could immobilize enemy troops. Off the battlefield, he became a model of peaceful discipline, almost monastic in his daily life. In many ways, he lived out the paradox of war itself, the ability to confront death directly, yet afterward to embrace life fully, deliberately, and with humility. The psychological component of his influence cannot be overstated. During the Winter War, the mere rumor of his presence caused entire Soviet units to hesitate, lose cohesion, or retreat. He had weaponized fear long before military psychologists formally studied it. The concept of the no-go zone was not based on terrain or fortifications, but on the anticipation of encountering him. Even when Simo was no longer active on the front lines, his legend had already rewritten the rules of engagement. Armies learned that one highly skilled individual, operating with knowledge of terrain and unflinching patience, could wield strategic power that rivaled divisions. Simo's life after the war also provides profound insight into the human cost of such skill. Unlike some veterans who relished public recognition, he remained profoundly private. He avoided ceremonies and interviews, yet he did not retreat from society entirely. He engaged with his community quietly, mentoring younger hunters, maintaining local traditions, and sharing knowledge in ways that were practical rather than performative. His life demonstrated a remarkable integration of lethal skill and moral restraint, a balance rarely seen in military history. The White Death's influence extends to modern times. Today, sniper schools around the world cite Simo Häyhä as the archetype of patience, precision, and psychological mastery. His approach, minimizing risk, exploiting terrain, and calculating the human element, remains foundational in military doctrine. In a sense, his battlefield became immortal, a living classroom for generations of soldiers learning how a single individual can control the tempo of engagement and shape the behavior of larger forces through skill, discipline, and ingenuity. Even as his legend grew, Simo remained deeply human. He loved the simple things, the quiet of snow falling on trees, the scent of the forest, the companionship of his dogs. He reflected little on fame, but deeply on the land he had fought to protect. His humility was not performative, it was intrinsic, a core part of the man who had survived against overwhelming odds. He had faced death intimately, yet he returned to life with a respect for it, choosing to live deliberately rather than dwell in past violence. When he died in 2002 at the age of 96, the world mourned the passing of the deadliest sniper in history. Yet for those who knew him, the true measure of his life was not in the number of enemies he neutralized, but in the quiet dignity with which he lived afterward. Newspapers chronicled his 505 confirmed kills in 100 days, a feat unmatched in military history. But neighbors, friends, and family remembered a man who embodied patience, resilience, and integrity. He had demonstrated that a human being, small in stature but immense in will, could achieve what many believed impossible. yet remain grounded in the essential truths of life. The forests of Karelia, where Simo Häyhä once moved silently among the pines, remain a testament to his skill. Today, hikers, historians, and soldiers visiting the region often speak of an uncanny stillness, a presence in the snow that seems almost alive. It is a living echo of the White Death, a reminder that one man, armed with skill, patience, and the resolute spirit of Sisu, can shape history in profound and enduring ways. Simo Häyhä's story is more than a tale of war. It is a study of human capacity, a testament to the power of discipline and psychological mastery, and a reminder that greatness often comes in forms unseen, small, quiet, and utterly determined. A farmer from Rautjärvi, who weighed less than most soldiers and stood barely 5'3", became a legend not through technology, brute strength, or numbers, but through mastery of self, environment, and the art of patience. His legacy endures in military doctrine, in history books, and in the whispers of the Finnish forests, forever a symbol of what one determined human being can accomplish against overwhelming odds.